Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coronavirus World Talk. Today, we have a very special guest joining us from Ottawa, but has some recent travels to China. So let's bring him in. Ben, how are you?
Really good, Marty. Thanks for having me on the show. Really glad to be here, and hoping that I can shed a little bit of light on the current situation based on my recent experience.
So give people a bit of an intro. Who is Ben? What does he do? Why was he traveling to China?
Right. So I had a little bit of a unique opportunity to put my real estate business here in Ottawa on hold, and travel overseas to work, live, and experience mainland China. And one of the big goals there was to learn Mandarin at the same time and apply it back to real estate business. So a 2-year plan, and left for China in early December of last year, and just kind of started, hit the ground running. But then obviously, as you know, just the whole issue with the coronavirus took over, and really just impacted life there. In a very quick and a very in a very strong way.
Which city were you in?
So I was in Zhongshan, which is a city of 3.5 million, just like close to the southern point of mainland China. And the closest city that would be like pretty recognizable would be either Guangzhou, which is 15 million, and Hong Kong is also very close. It's about an hour ferry ride, about an hour and a half ferry ride.
How far is Wuhan?
Wuhan is about 1,050 kilometers away from where I was living in Zhongshan.
Okay, so like Windsor and Ottawa type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Close enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
hmm
And in
Yeah.
which month did you start to hear rumblings about this virus?
So we actually started to hear about it around January. I remember at a market, buying some things for Chinese New Year, and so we heard about it. That would have been January 23rd. And then by January 25th, life as we knew it was completely different. Things were starting to get shut down. And people were starting to hear rumblings about quarantine measures, isolation measures, and basically, just that things were going to change very, very quickly in the coming days. But the first I had heard about it was January 23rd, when the
Were,
news kind of brought to us.
were you worried right off the bat?
No, not at all. And even in the first week, we weren't really sure. I wasn't really sure what to expect, just because obviously, you have a different system of government, and measures can be imposed, just kind of at the snap of fingers. So I thought, okay, maybe this is kind of a normal response. I wasn't sure, if this had happened. When when the SARS outbreak hit, or when swine flu, was kind of making the rounds. But we weren't really too worried about it in the first week, until like the heavy quarantine, and police monitored isolation occurred.
How is the Chinese quarantine versus the Canadian quarantine? What's the difference between those two experiences?
So basically night and day. When after the first week, where things were kind of getting figured out in China, um, we started the second week by having police health tents essentially at every residential entry and exit. So in my apartment building or in my apartment complex of 5 buildings, um, there were only 2 exit points, and there were police tents set up at both of those. And to start the second week, which lasted, the second week of quarantine, the heavy measure lasted for about 2.5 weeks, and only one family member per apartment household was allowed to go out every 2 days for a maximum of 3 hours. So, imagine, you live with your spouse and two kids. Only one of you can leave the apartment or can leave the house every 2 days, and it's basically just to go get groceries. And then anything else that you need, you just have to call in for delivery. That would be dropped off at the police tent kiosk. And of course, other stipulations, like if you were going out, you would have to sign out with the police. They would check your temperature on the way out. If you were going to an open market, you would be thermal screened there just to make sure you weren't showing signs of a fever or anything like that. You would always have to be wearing your mask. And then upon entry back into your apartment complex, you would be screened again for temperature, and you would have to sign back in. And they would keep a record of that. You would have to show ID. Obviously, for me, it was very easy because I was one of the only white people in the city. So they were, it was pretty easy for them to keep tabs on me. But at
And
the same time, they would still request my passport.
what would they do if your temperature was too high
They would escort you to the hospital.
and you have no word in it?
No, absolutely not.
Did that, how was the mood? Were you frightened by that, or were you reassured by those measures?
I mean, uh, I was a little bit of both for sure. I mean, obviously, it's not it's not incredibly easy to acquire international news. And so even though I had a VPN, the internet would be very, very slow. So it's difficult, and I can't really understand a lot of the local news. So even though other people, other friends that I had made in the city, would be a little bit reassuring, it's still a pretty scary experience, especially being so new to the country. And just, I mean, seeing that kind of the mobilization of resources in such a short period of time, where basically you cannot go anywhere without without some sort of um, police monitoring is really just concerning.
Yeah.
It's and so that was certainly a little bit worrisome. But I mean, going into my fourth, fifth week of quarantine and isolation in China, it was a lot more comfortable. It was just kind of routine. Once I was able to go out every day, then I would just make my rounds to the coffee shop, the grocery store, and then back home. I mean, no point being out too much, but after you spent 5-6 weeks in isolation in my apartment was about 300 square feet, then I mean, you just start to go a little stir crazy. So that was the only real difficulty. But it was like a ghost town. It was like something from like Resident Evil, where there was no traffic. Like there was no one on the streets. There were no cars. Like it was just so surreal. Even here, I mean, it seems like a bustling metropolis lately compared to the heaviest quarantine days in China. So
So when did you return to Ottawa?
March 11th.
And are you
So
still at home on lockdown, or I guess it's
no,
over?
I haven't visited any family or friends or anything, but that's only really to satisfy the measures that the government has put into place. But I've basically been in isolation for 2 weeks since I returned home. And then my friend who owns the house came back after 2 weeks. So I just have the one roommate. But other than that, I go out once a week for groceries and to the LCBO and things like that. But otherwise, just kind of hang around here.
And a bit more on the Canadian measures and Ontario and Ottawa measures. Is
Mhm.
there anything that you wish they would implement that they had going on in China here?
I wish they would have closed the borders a lot sooner. I was basically able to just waltz back into the country on a connecting flight from like Hong Kong through Vancouver. And I wasn't screened for temperature. I was on a 787 from Hong Kong, and everyone was just allowed to basically walk in without any measures being implemented. So that was So, I wish the response had been a little bit quicker. And I mean, based on like the way that people live here, so many single detached homes or, townhome living, it would be difficult to do the same sorts of things. But I think that, I think that as long as people just don't touch their face, because everyone wore a mask in China. So, if you just don't touch your face, and if you're covering, if you sneeze or anything like that, even if you're asymptomatic, as long as you're not going around touching your face and then touching other things, then there's really no good means for the virus to get around. But I think that everyone is doing more than their part right now in terms of the distancing, in terms of calling out groups, and making sure that any functions that aren't allowed get shut down quickly. I think that people are doing a lot here, but one thing is early detection of the fever by using the temperature guns seem to prove quite useful in China. So I'm a little bit surprised that we don't see that at places like Costco, or or big areas, yeah, supermarkets, things like that. Because if you go to the supermarket and touch something and you don't have symptoms, but you have the virus, and then somebody else touches it, it doesn't matter how distanced you are. You just have to be sanitary, and you just have to keep your hands away from your face.
So two more questions for you. Are you planning on
Sure.
returning back to China once this is all done? And this is obviously changing the world. What's the silver lining? Where is this impacting the world in a positive way?
So yeah, I'm definitely going to return to China. I actually left about half of my belongings at my apartment there.
Gotcha.
And so the border is closed right now to any foreign nationals. But once I am allowed back in the country, then I will fly back and resume, kind of resume my project, as it were. And I think the silver lining is, it's really promoting a lot of togetherness. I've had more video chats with friends who I otherwise probably wouldn't have spoken to, than ever before. People are really building each other up, and it seems like there's a stronger sense of community in general. And I think that applies on a global scale as well. It's kind of a good exercise, for everyone to come together. I mean, I really can't, in my lifetime, I really can't imagine something that's been more impactful, just in terms of economically, and, just as a global struggle. So I really think that, that everyone being able to come together, and everyone being able to support each other, volunteer in any capacity that they can, and just kind of bring out the best in people. I've seen a lot more of the best than I have, the worst of people. So I think, I think that's the silver lining here, is that, everyone's really, really building each other up. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Coronavirus World Talk. Ciao.
Thanks a lot, Marty. Take care.
A huge shout out to today's sponsor, gmanstudio.com. gmanstudio.com offers a very unique service, a virtual producer service, where they will allow you to film an interview on Zoom, then cut and edit the interview to your specifications. If you're looking for any type of virtual producer services, think gmanstudio.com.